embaixador na Universidade da Califórnia, tá, sob a orientação do Scott, né, do professor Scott Esposado. E o Saul tem pesquisado bastante aqui sobre o sistema eleitoral, né, o paper que ele trouxe para a gente, para discutir com a gente, é bem interessante, foi ele que ele enviou, né, e tem feito também uma metodologia de pesquisa que foi usada, é a metodologia de fazer surveys, um experimento com surveys, ou seja, uma coisa nova que a gente não tem feito aqui, né. Então eu achei que era legal trazer o Saul aqui e convidar para passar um pouquinho da experiência dele, né. Então acho que é uma... Eu agradeço muito ao Saul por ter vindo aqui, é um prazer ter vindo. Depois que eu soube que o cara vem ao Brasil uma vez por ano, mais ou menos, e que é corintiano, aí a nossa circulação aumentou muito mais.
Vou apresentar em inglês, mas fica à vontade de fazer perguntas em português e a gente pode discutir em português também. Qualquer dúvida, fica à vontade de mim e falar, não tem problema. Thank you guys very much for being here. Thank you very much, George, for arranging this. I'm really looking forward to getting everyone's thoughts and feedback and questions. So the plan is I'm going to discuss briefly, just give you a brief overview of my dissertation project, and then I will show you some results from a survey experiment I conducted last summer, which are the results of the paper that was sent out, and then talk a little bit about the research design for the project I'm working on right now. So let me just move over here. So the central question of the dissertation is, what are the costs of providing voters with more choice? And so there's a very well-developed body of work in political science that we're probably all familiar with, which tells us that there are all kinds of benefits associated with providing voters with more choice in elections. So within limits, as more parties and more candidates enter elections, we have a more representative pool of candidates, we have more representative policy positions, better representation of minority groups, more representative elected bodies, and perhaps more representative policy outcomes as well. On the other hand, there's also this very well-developed body of literature in psychology, marketing, sociology, consumer choice, which tells us that sometimes more choice is actually less. And that when people are presented with too much choice, they can often become dissatisfied, they can be led to make suboptimal choices, and in some cases they can avoid choice-making altogether. So this is a problem that we face in our daily lives as consumers all the time. So when you go to the supermarket to buy a toothbrush, or the drugstore, and this problem is particularly bad in the United States, but I see it here in Brazil as well.
Especially for cereal.
Cereal, right, exactly. It can be overwhelming. You go and there's 50 different kinds of toothbrushes, and of course there's probably a perfect toothbrush for you there, but you may never find it, and you might leave kind of dissatisfied with a lousy toothbrush, and maybe you'd avoid buying a toothbrush altogether. We hope you buy a toothbrush, but maybe not. And so, and as Carrie and Hicks point out in their recent paper on the electoral sweet spot from last year, these questions about cognitive capacity haven't received very much attention in political science and research on the design of electoral institutions. And so that's the central question of the dissertation. To what extent are voters actually able to take advantage of more choice in elections? So the dissertation has 4 sections. The first is an experiment, which I'll show you the results from today, which shows that increasing the number of candidates can actually increase abstention rates, can actually deter participation. The second piece is using some aggregate data from municipal elections here in Brazil, in Peru, and Chile, and it shows that as the number of candidates increases, participation declines, abstention rate increases. And this is robust to the kinds of controls you'd want to see for population size, urban, rural, things like that. So it's not an artifact of cities having higher abstention rates than rural small towns. The third piece is the research design I'm going to present today, which looks at the quality of voters' choices. So the question here is for voters who do decide to make choices, how does having more choice affect the quality of the choices that they make? And the fourth piece has to do with candidate coordination in multi-member districts. And the question here is how candidate coordination can help facilitate choice, how it can reduce the size of the effective choice sets that voters deal with and the complexity of those choice sets. So for example, we know that in Sao Paulo, there are over 1,000 candidates recently running for vereador and running for federal deputy, but kind of the effective number of candidates that voters actually deal with is far lower. Nobody actually considers 1,000 candidates, but perhaps they consider 5 or 10 or some other number. And I think that in a large part that's a function of candidate coordination, so that's that final piece of the picture. So I'll start with some results from the paper that was emailed out, and these are results from a survey experiment I conducted here along with Scott Esposado and Rosario Aguilar, another co-author. And we conducted a survey of 2,400 voters here in Sao Paulo. Voters were shown profiles of hypothetical legislative candidates and asked to cast a vote. What we do is test for what I do here is test for an effect of the number of candidates on abstention rates. So we randomly assign voters to see either 2, 3, 6, or 12 candidates, and then randomize the presence of party labels. So some voters saw candidates with no party labels, other voters saw candidates from one of the three largest parties, the PTP, SCB, and the PPP. So there were 8, for our purposes here today, there were 8 experimental conditions. With 2 candidates, there was a condition with no party in the party, and party cues, 3 candidates, the same thing, 6 and 12 candidates. There are 8 potential experimental conditions. This is what the candidate profiles look like. So here we have 2 candidates. Each candidate has a name, in this case a party affiliation, although half did not. Photograph, a brief background, which talks about their educational history, professional life, a little bit about their families, and then policy positions on one of 3 issues, in this case taxes, healthcare, and the environment. So this is what the 2 candidate stimulus look like. This is what the 3 candidate condition looked like. So as you can see, the first 2 candidates, Sergio and Fernando, are still here, and we just added a 3rd candidate. So as the choice set size grew, the smaller choice sets are just subsets of the larger choice sets. So the same candidates from the smaller choice sets remain.
Did you randomize the platforms across parties? So this guy
Right.
from PT, he could have been at PSDB, but with the same.
So they're not randomized. In the experiment that I'll show you next, the design, everything is randomized. Here they were fixed. The best we could do is make sure that the party affiliation, because this was done on paper, so it was incredibly difficult as it was. The best we could do is make sure that the party affiliations weren't contradictory, at least they fit in some way with the policy positions. There were no crazy kind of bad fits.
And that's for major or minor?
This is for Deputado Federal. So this is the 3 candidate condition, the 6 candidate condition, and the 12 candidate condition. Of course, this is shrunk to fit on the screen, but we had giant A3 paper, thanks to the Graphica here at the gym. The font size is the same. So, onto some results. So, we have 2 plots here, a plot for the conditions without party information and a plot for the conditions with party cues. The x-axis is the number of candidates that respondents saw, 2, 3, 6, or 12. The y-axis is the sample mean for abstention in that particular treatment group. Or you can think of it as the probability of abstention for a respondent in that group. These are just 95%, these are sample means with 95% confidence intervals. We see there's a few things that are worth pointing out. The first is, let's ignore the 2 candidate condition for now. So ignoring the 2 candidate condition, what we see is that there's, in both without and with party cues, there's a significant positive relationship, positive effect of the number of candidates on abstention rates. That is, as the number of candidates increase from 3 to 6 and then 12, we see that the abstention rate also increased, with and without party cues. The second thing that's worth pointing out is that the size of the effect is substantively quite large. So here in the 3 candidate condition, for example, the abstention rate was something like 26%, but increasing the number of candidates to 12 increased the abstention rate to 39%, which is like it's something around 45 or 50% increase in the abstention rate, just increasing the number of candidates from 3 to 12. The second thing that's worth pointing out is that there's not, again, ignoring the 2 candidate condition for now, otherwise there's not much difference between the conditions without and with party cues. So my expectation was that having information about candidates of party affiliation should have facilitated choice making, in the sense that it can act as some kind of a filter and kind of help people reduce the choice sets by perhaps eliminating candidates or preferring candidates from particular parties. That doesn't seem to be the case. There's 2 candidate condition aside, there's very little to no difference between the conditions with and without party cues. So it seems that in this sense, party labels didn't actually facilitate choice making.
Except that from 3 to 6, you have a significant difference at 95%, and you don't have the significance
So
from 3 to 6 when you have the party cues.
Right, and that has to do with these are just sample means, right? So I'll show you some Loja results that show that the finding is robust, but that's right. And in this condition, we actually had more respondents in this condition, so the confidence intervals are smaller. But that's right. The second thing is, and then finally about the 2 candidate conditions, what we see here is that with no party cues, there may be some kind of like non-linear or curvilinear relationship, whereas wherein providing people with a little bit more choice, increasing the number of candidates from 2 to 3, actually facilitates choice making, which kind of makes sense that with small numbers of candidates, the addition of 1 or 2 candidates might actually help people make choices. But we see that effect's quickly reversed somewhere between 3 and 6. We can't tell where it's minimized here, and then we start to see a positive effect of the number of candidates on abstention rate. So what was different about the condition with party cues? My suspicion is that two parties that were used in the condition with party cues were the PT and the PSDB. And so in Brazil in general, and here in Sao Paulo in particular, I think that those parties, and you guys would certainly know better than I would, those parties represent a very salient cleavage for voters. So being able to make a choice, or being asked to make a choice between a PT and a PSDB candidate may be something that people can do very easily. And so that might have led the condition with the party cues to have a different result from without party cues. Yeah.
Could you just explain the three, so the left one, the three candidates? Because in the paper there's a footnote where it said you also varied race and gender on that? Is that
Right.
So are all of those observations?
Right, so these are pooled. So there were other treatments in the experiment. We also varied candidate race and gender. And there were more conditions with 3 candidates.
Okay, but here you haven't separated that out. You've included all.
I pulled them all here, but the results are robust to not including those.
Okay, so it's still a significant difference even though you should exclude.
Right.
Okay.
And that's why you see the smaller confidence interval here that
Yeah.
you said.
You know that people is able to differentiate between 95% of people is able to differentiate between 7 different colors.
Mhm.
It's very rare that you can differentiate more than 7 colors.
Mhm.
Your results are kind of consistent with this.
Right, so it's somewhere in the same area, right.
Most people cannot differentiate more than 5 colors.
Mhm. So that's somewhere around where this relationship's minimized. So there may be some kind of universal
Yeah.
kind of breaking point or overwhelming point. That's interesting. So these are some regression results. I think I'll actually skip them in the interest of time. I just kind of show you what we just saw in the plot anyway. Just show you the findings are robust to the different controls. Yeah.
What is abstention exactly?
So in this experiment, they were asked, the exact wording was something like, which of these candidates would you vote for, or would you choose not? Something like, who would you vote for, or would you prefer to vote for none at all? Something like that. And so respondents who reported none at all, were considered to abstain. Some people would,
Yeah, could be blank.
right, this is maybe equivalent to using the blank button on the electronic ballot, right? Some people would say none before we even ask them, before we even say or none. We'd say, who would you want to vote for? No. But generally people Alright, so these are the results from this part. I think what they show pretty clearly, at least in this experimental context, is that as the number of candidates increased, people were participation rates decreased significantly. So people were actually less likely to make choices when they had more options. So the next step of the project is what I'm working on right now, and the idea is to answer the question about the quality of voters' choices. So for voters who actually choose or are able to make choices, what is the quality of their choice like? How does that vary with the number of candidates? And so to do so, I'm employing another survey experiment which varies the number of candidates from 3 to 6 and 12. Again, presents voters with hypothetical legislative candidates and asks them to cast a vote. And the main hypothesis here is that as the number of candidates increases, voters are less likely to cast the correct vote. And so to do this, I'm going to show you today a survey interface I developed which tracks voters' information acquisition strategies. So it tracks which information voters choose to acquire about candidates and how this might vary both with the number of candidates and the probability that they vote correctly. And I'll explain.
When you say survey, like to 2,400 people, to have any kind of representation, you will just have 2,400 people randomly. Any care about representation, which kind of maneuver, does this group represent any target group?
Right, so in the current experiment, I'm going to be doing the majority of the recruitment on Facebook. I think using Facebook advertisements as per a recent paper by David Samuels and Seizo Zuko, which they've shown actually provides a pretty high quality, fairly representative national sample, or not terribly biased national sample. Last year was just here in Sao Paulo, in kind of a convenient sample in the center of the city. And so I think we got a fairly diverse population, but I'm not comfortable saying that it's representative necessarily of the city. And so, to the extent that you think that, if you think that that sample is very different from, the general population with respect to this choice problem, then I think that's an issue. I think that the question here should be fairly universal, and I think it may vary with different populations.